Ooh. Ho ho. Yo ho. Ah! I talked a bit about it in my preview, but Dragon's Crown was a game I just never had the time to come back to in the weeks and months following its release. It was yet another high quality unique game in a sea of other high quality unique releases, especially on the Vita, which Japanese devs were having a field day with. They got the release date right for Dragon's Crown Pro though. In May 2018, which I've dubbed the month of the remaster, there has been plenty of time for me to sit down and play it, and perhaps I played it a little too much. This review was due out like 2 days ago. Now initially this is going to seem at odds with what I just said, because I have to say that this is going to be a fairly short review. I could make it long, but that would mean talking about the story, which would mean spoiling it for everybody, and that isn't something I want to do. And the story is the main draw here, at least for me, and that makes it a tricky game to classify because I feel like it's at least 2 pretty distinct games in one. It's definitely a story-driven RPG, or at least a visual novel, but if you stripped all of that away, and I mean all of it, you would still be left with a really solid arcade beat-em-up. Most of the things you'd expect to find in an RPG are here: quests, character progression, a strong story focus, all kinds of equipment, upgradable skills, etc, etc. It even plays out a lot like a normal RPG from the beginning. You watch some story segments unfold, accept your quests, but instead of heading out into a vast world or dungeon, you head to a side-scrolling brawler-like level. It's something you don't see a whole lot of anymore, level or stage-based gameplay, but even rarer seeing it mashed up with an interesting story-driven RPG. The gameplay itself is quite fun, if not more than a little confusing and hard to follow when you have a full party, but each stage is littered with secrets and treasures. It's more than just walking to the right and killing things. The secrets, or rather hidden pathways, are what keep these sections of gameplay interesting, and they're needed, because it does begin to feel a little repetitive. How different can side-scrolling action really be, after all? It's something that gets highlighted more due to the stage-based design. In a normal RPG, the combat obviously gets repetitive, but combat is interspersed through the world or dungeon or whatever you're doing. In Dragon's Crown Pro, the dungeon is the combat. They are one and the same. It does its best to mitigate that feeling of repetitiveness though. Things like hidden paths that you have to scour each level for that I mentioned earlier, but you can also change the character you're playing before you set out, and change your party too. There is even a multiplayer option. Dragon's Crown Pro won't only satisfy those out there that like a good story, or a good beat 'em up, it's got the tabletop RPG or loot 'em up crowd covered too. At the end of each area that you complete, you are rewarded with the various treasures and things you've found throughout the stage, and as far as I can tell, it's all randomized loot. As I said, it's quite hard to classify Dragon's Crown Pro, but just to make it clear, the basic gameplay loop that you'll follow is story segment, then various preparations in town like picking up additional quests or buying items, then you'll head off to a side-scrolling dungeon where you'll be rewarded with a bunch of treasures upon completion, and then you do it all again. Stages or levels or dungeons, I'm not quite sure what to call them, they can be repeated as many times as you want, either to complete additional quests or to find more secrets, and the treasure you get does scale with your level, so you won't be rewarded with a bunch of low-level gear if you go and do that first dungeon again. Now while I can't delve into the story because you should experience it for yourself, I can tell you a few elements that I really liked, the major one being the narrator. Basically the entire game is narrated to you, and it's amazing. It makes me wish I had a narrator for my own life. Jay sits down to write his script for Dragon's Crown Pro. Jay is having difficulty figuring out what to write next. It would certainly make my life more interesting, especially if the smooth-talking default voice in Dragon's Crown Pro was narrating it. And that's right, I said default. I didn't figure this out until like 8 hours into the game, but you can actually change the narrator voice. There is the default and then one for each of the classes in the game, like the Amazon, Dwarf and Elf. And in Dragon's Crown Pro, you can also have the option for all of the Japanese voices as well. So in total, there are 14 different narrators. The game world is also full to the brim with detail. Each level is really well crafted. I love the style and I think the game looks exceptional. The other thing that is actually of note, which hasn't really been the case for quite a few of my recent reviews, is the soundtrack. There are tracks in here that are simply incredible, stunning. The stage select screen, which is kind of like the map, is both beautiful to look at and to listen to. The original soundtrack was fully orchestrated for Dragon's Crown Pro, and it sounds excellent all round. Dragon's Crown Pro also supports 4K and it runs without a hitch on my PS4 Pro. There is even an option to turn off certain effects if your system is struggling, but I never even had a hint that I'd need to use that on my playthrough. And what more is there to say, really? Dragon's Crown Pro is a really unique game, it's really well made, and I had quite a lot of fun with it. I'd happily recommend it to just about anybody because it does serve up something for just about everyone. You can get your deeper story-driven experience, or you can spend an hour beating living hell out of skeleton slimes, bats, and collecting that sweet loot. Definitely check it out, it's one of the remakes in May that's worth your time. You can find links for the game in the video description. Thanks for liking, subscribing, and sharing, and I'll see you all soon.